Hello, welcome back. My name is OzoneB, and this time I'm doing something a little bit different than what I've done in the past. If you've been following my channel, you know that I've got a world building series going on where I'm supposed to be practicing building things that don't suck. I really don't consider myself a builder. Today, I wanted to do a base showcase of a base that I've had on the server on an SMP that I've been playing on for quite some time. The server is MaximumMC.net, and this isn't a commercial for the server, but I put it out there to say that it's a great community, and if you're looking for a server, feel free to check it out. Now, this base that I'm about to reveal to you is something that I've worked on for well over a year. It is clearly a mega base category build, and it was all done in survival where the resources were gathered by hand. As you can see, I'm all decked out in netherite with wings, and I've been playing on this server a very long time. This is actually my third base that I've built here, but the first one that I've focused on decoration and the looks of it, and the first one and my first ever base that I consider to be in the mega base category. Every other base that I've built previously has been focused on functionality, building farms, being productive, and not on the aesthetics. You know, this is typical or keeping in line with the same things I've been saying on my world building series. But anyway, with this base, I've focused on aesthetics from the very beginning and trying to make it look very neat. And part of what makes it so neat is it's so big. So let's do a quick turnaround and let you see the mega base, the floating mountain island mega base behind me. Ready? Dun 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 dun. Here we go. Just take it in for a moment, and man, I wish it could be rendered in more. But as you can see, it is built over the ocean down below and it extends into the air quite a bit. I haven't put the top on it yet because, well, I haven't really needed any more space. Before we go into too much more detail about the build and the process, etc., let's do a fly around. It's hard to get an understanding or an appreciation of the scale from this far away on top of this perch. Right. That was fun, wasn't it? I really enjoyed flying around trying to show you just the sheer scale of the base. Every base has to have inspiration from somewhere, and for me, that was the painting called Flying Citadel by Keith Parkinson. This one has always really resonated with me, and I've always thought it was super cool. So when I got to the idea of trying to make a new base, I latched on to that memory and that painting and thought it would be a really great thing to try to replicate. Obviously, though, I've had to make some adaptations for the environment that we're in. First of all, this is not one giant piece of stone like the painting, and second of all, it's really not as big as the painting. We've only got so much world height to deal with here. But also, given that I'm in an ocean biome here with this lovely coral reef behind me, I felt it was appropriate to make this ocean themed, like it was part of the ocean seafloor that was raised up and is now flying above the ocean. But just how big is this base? Well, the initial rings that I laid out to gauge the size and scale were 9 chunks in diameter, or about 144 blocks. It's not a perfect circle, so that number is pretty rough. It's bigger on some ways and smaller on others. Over 150,000 blocks have been placed in order to make this behemoth of a base, both the inside and the out. The build itself stretches from Y35 all the way down at the bottom side of this giant fog effect to Y200 up at the top of the mountain, which clearly there's still room to grow and Y level to grow too. My plan is to build up to world height, but clearly I'm not there yet. This was a first for me on so many areas and levels. First of all, it's the first time I've ever done any terraforming. Second of all, it's the first time I've ever built anything of this scale. Thirdly, it's the first time I've ever created a block palette for the outside walls here. And fourthly, it's the first time I've ever attempted to do a gradient. This was before I knew much about World Edit and some of the painting tools that it had available. So all of this variation is done by hand. In fact, this entire base was free-handed, meaning I didn't go into creative first and plan it out. I just started building. And it kind of looks like it, you know? The layers are a little too regular. The gradients aren't gradiated enough. The palettes, there's a pretty clear line between these two layers. All in all, I think it shows. In spite of all the firsts, I feel like I worked really hard at this, and it took a lot of work and a long time, but I worked really hard at it, and I think it looks really good. I'm really proud of this build that I've made. And it's not done yet. We're continuing to work on it, of course. So what was my process? I didn't really have one. I kind of just made it up as I went along. But I've had lots of experience in building other things, and I applied many of those lessons to this project as well. So the first thing I did was choose an appropriate location. Now you can't even see it anymore because it's no longer here, but when it started out, there was an island right here, and that island actually had a very small plains biome. I wanted to have access to a plains biome so that I can have farms, like a flower farm, that only works in a plains biome. But part of it is also in this warm ocean, and I did want part of it to also be in that biome so that I can have farms like a coral farm that only works in a warm ocean biome. So this location was chosen specifically for the biomes that it covered, and because it was close by to my second base right here, so I didn't have to go very far. So that's the first step. The next step is to determine the scale of the build. I made a giant circle, which is now this waterfall around the base, to show just how big it needed to be. And once I was happy with the size that it was going to turn out to be, then I began to work up. And I actually sketched out on graph paper concentric rings at various Y levels to get the kind of shape that I wanted it to be. After I had the shape laid out, then I went and actually built rings at the various levels to give it the basic 3D shape that I wanted to have. Now I knew I wanted to have various layers of colors going up the side of this island, this floating island. And I knew I wanted it to go from rock to a dark color to a lighter color and then finally to sand, partly because I had been given an enormous amount of sandstone blocks to work with. When I made the initial bottom out of stone and started to bring it up, I wasn't thinking about gradients and block palettes. It wasn't until I started working on the next layer up that I decided that it needed some variation. And at about that time, I'd seen a Hermitcraft video where Grian was talking about block palettes, and so I thought, I need to do that. So when I came up with the block palettes, I basically looked at, I think it was soul sand, and then dirt, and then sand as the various layers for inspiration, and picked out blocks that had colors matching some of the pixels in each of those blocks. So for soul sand, it has a lot of dark stuff. I use soul sand an awful lot in both of these layers, but I went with the darker spruce and dark oak and brown terracotta in this layer. Up here, it was a lot of granite and oak and I forget what else. Just dirt, I think. And then this last one is a lot of sandstone and wool and stripped birch. At first, when I made the layers, I didn't have them smoothed out and the gradient between each layers, and boy did it show. I did not like that at all. I had to go back around probably 3 times reworking the gradient and removing blocks from one layer and moving them down and putting them into another layer all the way around before I got to a blending between the layers that I was kind of happy with. One thing to notice about the outside is how well lit it is. Well, you probably didn't notice until I said something, and that is a sign of a great design. You don't see torches and lanterns and everything spammed all over the outside in order to light it up, but yet you can clearly see that there is light showing on these blocks. And this was something that I learned very early on. After making this stone layer, the entire bottom was just shrouded in darkness, and I couldn't see anything, and I didn't want that at all. So I had to go and look up lighting tricks on how to get light to come around and light up my build without actually seeing the torches and lanterns. The trick is walls. So I've slammed myself into this little spot here, and we have an andesite wall giving a little bit of depth as well, but behind it is a torch. And that wall is considered a transparent block, and it lets light out and lights up the outside of the build. But you don't see the torch because of this wall. It's a very powerful lighting technique that I would have never known, and I had to look up from, I don't even remember where I learned it from, but this kind of thing makes a huge difference, in my opinion, in this build. So here we are in a creative backup copy of the base before it ever even had the mountain on it. And I'm doing this so that I can show you what it's like if it's not lit up with all the torches. Like I said, the whole base was really, really shadowed. So let's issue a couple commands and see the transformation happen. Minecraft's lighting is weird, but the net result is that you can see it's really dark. And it clearly just doesn't look as good. Putting all those torches in makes a huge difference, and it's such a minor thing to do. Isn't that incredible? As you can see, the inside is just covered with torches. I really wanted every part of this base to be mob-proofed, and I went through a lot of work to make that happen. After doing all of this massive building of the bottom part here, I started to fill it up with farms, starting with this massive gold farm. And adding others, bamboo, we've got a wool farm, there's a general mob farm, there's a giant wall of melons and a sugarcane farm, and then later adding dripstone farm there. So this is just a massive space in order to put farms. I never intended to try to occupy this space. As you've also seen, there's several other floating islands around the outside. I enjoyed making these, and I think there needs to be quite a few more, but I thought these added to the overall atmosphere of the giant floating island itself. Now for the top of the mountain, I enlisted the help of some friends, and I did work in creative at this point. I had figured out how to use Lightmatic and make schematic copies, and once this was all done in creative, then I made a Lightmatic schematic and brought it over and replicated it here. The ocean motif makes pretty good sense, but my ultimate plan was to have the entire mountaintop clustered with buildings, like the original inspiration photo. So eventually, these things will come down be replaced, I guess, as buildings are added, if I ever get around to it. It's pretty cool the way it is, and I like it, but it's a little plain and a little sparse. So I definitely wanted something a little more populated and I wanted to be able to have a variety of styles of buildings all kind of clumped together, hodgepodge around this mountain. That's the ultimate end goal, or well, that was the end goal, and we'll see where we end up. The inside was done next, but I'm going to continue on the outside for right now. This front piece was done pretty recently after the introduction of 1.17. We've got a copper block there and deep slate all over the place here. I felt it was important to try to utilize the ocean related blocks such as the prismarine on front and live coral blocks over here for accent color on the side, given that this is an ocean themed build in general. I think the front's symmetric and a little plain, but I think it looks pretty darn cool too. The storage room is the heart of the base, and I spent an awful lot of time thinking about what I wanted to do in this room, not the decorations. The decorations came afterward, but in terms of the mechanism. So on this wall, we have an automatic single item storage system with 3 rows of item filters. This is a design by JCraft to give it this flat interface using shulkers as the main storage, but there's a number of chests behind them so that there's quite a bit of storage all hidden away and accessible through the shulkers. On the other side over here is the Rascallion and Metamilo multi-item item sorter. Again, I'll link their build in the comments as well. This is a multi-item sorter, so this gets a whole bunch of variations of items based on a filter that's up there. So this is where you get all of the little bitty onesie-twosie things that you just don't want to have shulker boxes and large chests assigned to. The ceiling, however, is one of the things that I think is the best part of this base. I designed these cathedral ceilings and chandeliers, kind of inspired by Grian's chandeliers from Hermitcraft 7, and I love it. I really, really love it. It's very high. The purple of the portals makes a very solid accent. We get lots of light. We've got lots of variations in depth and structure with these arches. I'm just really, really proud of this, and I came up with this completely on my own, in creative, of course, and transferred it over to here. Going into the heart of the base, we got a main hallway here that leads to a bunch of villager farm areas, and each villager farm area is themed after the villagers that live there. So this is a room for clerics, and this should, I hope, look like the towers that you find the clerics in their villages when they spawn. And it's got a nice big mosaic window up there with lots of stone brick and variations. And we've even got an armor stand dedicated to each of the mobs that create rotten flesh, because the villagers like rotten flesh. And we've got all the mob heads around for them. I think this is a fun room, but each of the villager areas are like this. So, for instance, we have all of the fishermen over here, and they're on something that looks like a boat. I've got a villager trading hall machine back here, so building the boat around that machine is a bit of a stretch, but I think it works. Our stonemasons are back here in a cave. I put the blocks that they trade above them so I can easily know what kind of terracotta they trade. Lastly, we've got the farmers in their big old barn, replete with stocked shelves full of supplies. And on the other side, we've got the librarians in their massive library. These two things are kind of congruent, but they happen to be next to one another, so I made it work. The last thing to be added is this giant hole underneath the base itself. Now, I had to drain all the water around the island and dig out the island from about Y62, wherever water level is, all the way down to Y35. So in addition to the base being about 150,000 blocks, this fog effect is another 100,000 blocks in and of itself. Each layer of glass down here is about 15,000 blocks. There are 6 layers of glass plus another layer of netherrack underneath. Not counting the walls, that's well over 100,000 blocks placed just for a visual effect. I think it looks pretty darn good. I'm happy with it. The main point of this effect is to make it look like there's a giant hole left behind where the mountain was raised out of, leading down into the fiery pits of hell. So that's the base tour. I am super proud of everything that's been accomplished here. And like I said, it's taken well over a year of effort to collect the resources and get this build. Do you have any great ideas for what might be done to this base to make it even better? Leave a comment below if you do. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for coming by and joining me on MaximumMC.net SMP server. Hopefully I'll see you around.